and welcome to this third video dedicated to the history of the Armillary sphere. Today we're going to go a little further with regard to our knowledge of our guest by talking a little about its history. So before we get started, we remember in the previous video we looked at where this name came from, this celestial sphere, the starry sky that surrounds us with the Earth at the center. This object modelizes the apparent movement of the sky, and the sphere revolves within 24 hours. It's of course an apparent movement, we explain that, but it's a very important movement, and it's based on this apparent movement that astrology is based. So the word armillary means armilla, as we said, which is a bracelet or a ring, and you can see that this sphere is constituted of a number of bracelets that materialize certain elements, certain landmarks of the sphere, and it's these elements that we are going to study in the following videos. So in this current video, we're not going to look at too much detail of celestial elements, but we're going to try and understand where this object comes from, who invented it, and how it was used. We're also going to look at how closely linked to astrology it is. It's perhaps one of the objects that best represents and symbolizes the union between astrology and astronomy. So the story of the Armillary sphere will also bring us to the story of astrology and some great men, great astrologers. So where does this magnificent object come from? Where does it come from? So in order to understand this, we're going to look at the beginning of this love story between astrology and astronomy. We're going to start 2,500 to 3,000 years ago. So as you can imagine, in order to build this model of the sky, this 3D representation, this armillary sphere, you had to spend a lot of time observing the sky. The first great observers of the sky of the antiquity were the Babylonians, also known as the Chaldeans. They used to observe the sky meticulously and recorded all their data. In modern language, you could say that they constituted the very first database of celestial phenomena. So, astrological database. And thanks to all this knowledge, they were able to predict the exact positions of the moon and the planets, etc. So they were the first great observers of the sky, the Babylonians. And next come the Greeks. The Greeks, they mathematized, modelized, theorized the sky. We think that the armillary sphere was invented by the Greeks, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a typically Greek object, an object that translates the geometry of the sky. So if we look at a few great men who talk about the armillary sphere in ancient Greece. Plato, 4th century BC, in his book Timaeus, he basically said there's no point in trying to understand celestial phenomena if you don't have a mechanical representation of movements, which leads to believe that he'd already seen this type of object. And also what is interesting is that it shows the extent to which the movements of the sky are difficult to conceptualize, even for somebody such as Plato, who's, a pretty clever gentleman. And he clearly says that it's difficult to conceptualize the sky without having an object that enables us to do that. So that shows the extent to which the armillary sphere is essential. And let's also mention Cicero. I mean, he isn't Greek, but it's interesting. He wrote a passage where he refers to the armillary sphere, and more precisely, in his book, he refers to Archimedes' armillary sphere, 3rd century BC, an object that was apparently very precious to this great scholar. And Archimedes was the author of a treatise on Spheropeia. Spheropeia was a science in antiquity, science of the representation of the celestial globe. So Greeks, there was a great presence of the armillary sphere in Greece. So the Romans next. The Romans also used the armillary sphere a lot. Astrology was very present in Roman times. I mean, sometimes it was for the masses, but also sometimes it was very scientific astrology or astronomy. Ptolemy, 2nd century BC, was a great scholar who many astrologers and astronomers refer to for over 1500 years. So you can't talk about the armillary sphere without mentioning his book, the Tetrabiblos, which is the Bible of astrologers for a number of centuries. And Ptolemy used an armillary sphere to establish a cartography of the sky. But what I need to mention is that for Ptolemy, the armillary sphere was a scientific tool, so it was an educational tool to understand and explain the movements of the sky, but also, and very significantly, a scientific tool. And so that's the case with Ptolemy. So next there's the Middle Age. In the Middle Age, there was a lot of interest in the armillary sphere, and a lot of armillary spheres were built. And then the Renaissance, that really was the golden age of the armillary sphere. It's a symbol, scientific object, and a symbol of knowledge, a symbol of wisdom. You can see many armillary spheres from the Renaissance in many European museums. In the Vatican, for example, there are many armillary spheres in the Vatican. And the greatest armillary spheres that are no longer among us, unfortunately, but there are documents that refer to them, will actually be designed by the greatest astronomer of the 16th century, Tycho Brahe, who was also an astrologer. And Tycho Brahe designed some armillary spheres that went from 1 meter to 2.5 meters in diameter. So you can imagine, in fact, for those who are familiar with the famous Coronelli globes that are exhibited in the National Library in Paris, they were designed under Louis XIV. They're 4 meters in diameter. Well, these globes, which are purely for decorative purposes, can give you an idea of the gigantic size of the objects that were designed by Tycho Brahe. And of course, the objects that he did, that he didn't do them for educational purposes. He was a great astronomer, and they were scientific objects, very precise scientific objects, in order to study the sky, to map the sky. Tycho Brahe gave the exact position of more than 1,000 stars in our celestial sphere. So the age of Enlightenment, during the age of Enlightenment, it became a symbol of science. It's in a lot of paintings. It's a symbol of knowledge and science. Colbert, for instance, you can see Colbert presenting it to the members of the Academy of Science. Also to be mentioned as a symbol is that the armillary sphere appears on the Portuguese flag. And of course, it's a reminder of the glorious maritime history of Portugal, Magellan, for instance. And sailors didn't use an armillary sphere, but astrolabes. We'll see it in video number 11. And the astrolabe is a cousin of the armillary sphere, which is why the armillary sphere is present on the Portuguese flag. So today, you don't see the armillary sphere that often. It's more of an object of the past. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a pity, because it's an object that is really helpful when it comes to understanding the sky. It should be present in schools, or at least in astronomy and astrology schools. And unfortunately, it often isn't the case. As I said, it's a pity. And that is one of the reasons that motivated me to actually do these videos. So I'm going to leave it at that. In video number 4, we're going to really try and better understand this object, the various rings of this object. And as a reminder, if you want to go further, remember there is video number 12 with bibliographical references. So thank you very much, and I'll see you very soon. Goodbye.